Hey everybody, welcome back to the Plays and Fades YouTube channel. I'm your host, Gordo Gambles, and welcome back to the full card breakdown. This time for UFC Abu Dhabi. We are overseas for an early start time card and a pretty good one, to say the least. We have ourselves Umar Nurmagomedov versus Corey Sandhagen in the main event. Something that was supposed to be in Nashville, but we have it a year later, and a fight that I am really looking forward to. We have ourselves 13 fights to talk about, so I do want to dive in quickly. Before I do so, hit the like button down below, subscribe to the channel. Last week was not the best. It was a tough card. I admit that. I worked through it, and I am hungrier than ever to look to bounce back this week. It should be a fun card. I like my reads. I'm gonna try to keep these ones quicker breakdown and fly through them. Give you guys the information I got here, and hopefully we go out there and make some money. Once again, check out CoolBet, check out Established Run. You guys know the whole deal. Let's not waste any more time, and let's dive into the fights. We get the fight night started with the 9-2 Cedric Dumas versus the 11-9 Denis Tiuliulin in what is a reschedule about one we were supposed to see a couple months ago. We now have on the docket here. I have broken it down once before. My read stays the same. Denis Tiuliulin is not somebody who I necessarily rate as the highest level of UFC talent. 1-4 inside the UFC. Every single one of his fights is finished. He's a guy who has no really ground game, not the best minute winner on the feet either, but he does have fight-ending power on the feet. He's a guy who, although we cannot sustain it for 3 rounds, can go out there early and throw the fight any intention. He's faced Cedric Dumas, a guy who is riddled with legal issues and fight IQ issues, but a guy who does have a solid jab, is able to win minutes from the outside, does have decent boxing fundamentals, and also a guy who can take it down to the ground. Shall that be the best path to victory? He showed a great guillotine at Dana White Contender Series performance, has not looked the best recently, and has also struggled with cardio issues, but he has at least shown to me that he can compete at the UFC level. He can go out there and win minutes on the feet. He can go out there and win minutes on the ground. He has shown a decent chin, and he is still somebody who I think rates out higher long-term than Denis Tiuliulin. Of course, there's always a world where Tiuliulin does land that knockout shot and Dumas quits, but I do think more times than not, Dumas has the edge in the grappling, has the end of the minute winning ability, and can compete in the feet. I do like him to win this fight here. Now, am I playing him at this price tag? No, not at all. I'm not. Cedric Dumas is not the most trustworthy fighter, and I will be staying away from moneyline. Unders, I think, are viable if there's a good enough line, but on DraftKings, a solid fight here to target. 8.9K, it is a little more expensive than usual, especially considering his box score. He only scored 79 and 64 in his 2 wins, but he does have a guy who's been finishing all his losses. He does have a guy where he does have a grappling path of victory against him, and I do think at 8.9K, he does have a decent ceiling for a GP play this week. Tiuliulin, same thing, only has 1 win, and when he did go out there and win, he went out there and scored 124 points. He has knockout or bust. I don't think he wins too often, so I'm not getting him too often, but he is a punt play down low if you're looking for an all or nothing type of score. Prefer Dumas as my pick to win. Solid second tier pivot play on DraftKings, and an interesting fight as a whole that I do think can inside the distance. Next up, 12-5-1 Jai Herbert versus the 14-3 Rolando Bedoya, and this is actually a pretty fun fight. This is a striker's delight, whereas these are 2 guys who want to go out there and swang and bang. Not much grappling involved for either fighter, but they bring different styles to the cage, right? Jai Herbert is the more technical fighter. He can win minutes. He can win fights. He's got good range, solid power from the outside, dropped Yayha Tapor in that matchup there, but has shown he can win fights until he's not. His chin has been his biggest liability, and although he can go out there and win minutes at a high clip, strike with a lot of people in his division, he has shown that when he gets caught, he can be dropped, and he can lose fights that way as well. Bedoya is kind of the opposite style. He's not a technical fighter. He's not that good from range. He's not going to win optics, look pretty, but he'll go forward, and he'll absorb so much damage and be extremely durable. He's really the opposite of Herbert. Not much technicality, but a ton of durability. He can go forward and force exchanges. Coming down in weight here at 155, I do think he is someone who's going to have more output in this matchup, and who can definitely win that finishing shot. I think when it comes to finishing upside, Bedoya has a ton of finishing upside of this matchup. But more times than not, I do think Jai Herbert's able to control the distance. Yes, Bedoya is coming down in weight, but it's still going to be Jai Herbert being the taller fighter, having more range, and he's able to use that range pretty well. He can go out there and win minutes, and although Bedoya does have power, he will force exchanges. Until that knockout happens, I do think it's Herbert who winning. I do think he's someone who's able to control the distance, so he's my pick to win. I do think he has more minute winning upside. It has more ability to win the optics in this matchup here, considering how hittable Bedoya is. Now, of course, Bedoya does have more finish upside, so do not falter anybody for taking him, but I am picking Jai Herbert. DraftKings wise, though, opposite. Like I mentioned, Jai Herbert more times than not is going to win a decision if he's going to win. So at 8.6K, not only does he have negative line value, but scored 64 points in his last win. Not a guy who goes out there and scores very well on DraftKings. And then you look to Bedoya, and like I said, his path to victory is rooted in knockout success. Something that I do think he can get here against Herbert, and I do think in doing so, his volume, his pressure, and his knockout upside makes him a better DraftKings option at 7.6K. So although I'm picking Herbert to win, he's my pick on the money line. I think that Bedoya has more DraftKings equity. I think he has a higher ceiling in a win with that knockout upside, and I do think his path to victory score as well against a very chinny Jai Herbert. So Herbert as my pick to win, Bedoya on DraftKings underdog. Should be an interesting fight. Next up, 8-0 Victoria Dudakova versus the 8-6 Sam Hughes, and This is an interesting one to me because I'm not the biggest Dudakova fan. I was ready to bet big on Gatto. I think I even bet Estela Nunez before I broke arm in that matchup. Dudakova does not rate out as an 8-0 prospect to me. She's super hittable on the feet. Her cardio has been tested, and she's put herself in some really precarious situation on the mat. I do think when she gets to step up in competition, aside from, New Frey and Estela Nunez, she's able to go out there and have some success. Sam Hughes doesn't really rate out as a fighter. She is someone who is always a dog. She's always hungry to go out there and win. But as someone who is typically lined plus 300, it's a lot easier to bet her there. At this plus 150 line, she is someone who doesn't rate out as the best minute winner in this matchup. She also wants to go out there and wrestle, and I do think she can really test that cardio of Dudakova. Do not get me wrong, I do think Sam Hughes is someone who could win this fight, but is never someone who I really want to trust at too high of a clip. She is not the best striker on the feet. She can be hit, and although she's a dog when it comes to wrestling, she has smaller stature, can be reversed in these positions, and can be taken down herself. So simply put, this is a fight that I think that Dudakova should win. I think she's a better technicality on the feet. I think she's someone who can win wrestling exchange early on. But as this fight goes on, the later it gets, I trust Sam Hughes' durability, her resiliency, and her level of competition way more as the fight goes on. And I do think, although while they're fresh, I'm going to favor Dudakova here. Sam Hughes is super live for a round 3 finish or a later rally on the scorecards. So I ended up picking Dudakova in this matchup. I do think it's extremely close. More plus money on Hughes, and I would love to take a shot on her because she is a dog who you like to back. But I do think Dudakova is going to have success early. I do think she rates as a better technical prospect. And being the undefeated fighter, Russian fighter in Abu Dhabi, I do think she's someone who may get her hand raised in a close decision. I will slightly lean towards Dudakova in this matchup. DraftKings-wise, though, Sam Hughes, 7.7. I guess she does have some upside, being someone who will go forward and wrestle later rounds, but I think there may be better options on the slate. Dudakova also rates out as someone who looks good on paper, but she had an easier person to take down in front of her in New Frey and still only scored 77 points. I do not think Dudakova is necessarily someone who has to wrestle in this matchup, and I do think she's a better striker than Hughes, so that could lead to a lower DraftKings score. At 8.5K, I do see some, let's say, contrarian upside, being someone who I don't expect to be that popular, but I do think there are better options on the slate. The pick is Dudakova. I think Hughes is live late, but gun to my head, I would pick Dudakova, pick to win, and a decent contrarian play, but not my first option on DraftKings. Then we have the 12-4 Kutateladze versus the 13-2 Jordan Vucenic, making his debut here from Cage Warriors on short notice of a weight class against Kutateladze. And I like Jordan Vucenic. He's a guy who's been a dog himself. Got cool tattoos, but a guy who has continuously counted out, made the underdog, and is able to fight through it. Very solid submission game on the mat. A guy who can compete in the feet as well. But his bread and butter being that submission game. He's won his last 4 bouts, all of them coming by submission. He is able to be very, very sneaky when it comes to it. I do think in this matchup, too, he is going to be the better pure submission artist. I think he's someone who has a better pure grappling. Kutateladze has never been his strong suit, but when it comes to it, Kutateladze is still a very elite striker. He is someone who, yes, maybe has lost his last one, but has always been a phenomenal, quick, powerful striker on the feet, who's able to snap those kicks to the body, able to mix up his levels very, very well, and score well on the feet. I think that kind of why he is the favorite in this matchup. Being the guy who has a full camp, being the guy who is able to go out there and prove his striking prowess, is someone who's extremely dangerous. And when it comes to it, if Vucenic gets him in these grappling transitions, I do think he has a chance to submit Kutateladze here. Do not get me wrong. But when it comes down to picking the guy who I think wins more often than not, wins the striking exchanges, able to keep this fight standing and win the optics that way, I haven't picked Kutateladze in this matchup. I do think when it comes to it, if this line continues to climb, Vucenic could be a very live dog. I like his style, I like his grittiness, his toughness, and ability to fight through adversity. And we have seen Guram tested before, but on face value, where the two fighters are now, I am going to lean towards Guram having more advantages in that striking department and potentially winning minutes that way as well. When it comes to DraftKings, though, again, another one of these fights where I'm completely flipped. Guram Kutateladze, I don't see him knocking out Vucenic too often at 8.8K. He has not scored too well on DraftKings with no grappling upside and not the most finish upside. He scored 56 points in his win against Gamrot. Again, great win, but a win that was most contested on the feet. I think he's someone who does not necessarily have the best volume, finishing upside, or takedown upside, meaning him at 8.8K is not just a great DraftKings option. I prefer Dumas ahead of him. I prefer other options we'll talk about later, and I kind of prefer the Vucenic side on DraftKings. 7.4K, like I mentioned, if he wants to win this fight, he's going to have to dig deep. He's going to have to search for takedowns, look for that opportunistic submission, and I do not think he wins this fight without either finishing him on the mat or having continued ground success, which leads for him at 7.4K being a very solid GPP upside option. Because again, I'm not a guy who I think wins this fight all the time, but a guy who, when he does, will score very, very well. Like I said, submission upside, potential grappling upside. I do think he's got to dig deep if he wants to get this win, but if he does win, I do think he scores very well. So give me Guram Kutateladze to win this fight outright. However, DraftKings-wise, I do think Vucenic has more upside. This should be a very, very fun fight, one that I am looking forward to. Next up, 11-6 Dontel Majors, the 12-1 Shamil Gaziev, and we go back down again. And I'm not the biggest fan of Shamil Gaziev. He is not someone who I necessarily rate out as the best prospect. I picked Bedoya against him. I've consistently gotten the guy wrong because he is a powerful, big, bulky dude who may be in your nightmares in some photos that he's posted online, but a guy who does have a lot of power on the feet, a guy who will go forward, A guy who does have solid ground and pound for top position, but he doesn't always use that wrestling. He can definitely be hit in his own right, and he hasn't really been thrown into deep waters that much, aside from his last bout. Dontel Mays, though, has not necessarily been a guy who's been the most trustworthy or consistent either. His only 4 wins in the UFC have been to Roque Martinez, Josh Parisian, Andrei Arlovski, and Cal Machado. The guy has been a bit back and forth, losing fights he should win, winning fights he should lose. The guy's been all over the place. And yes, deep down, he does have a solid wrestling game that he can use against weak level of competition, but he's just a slow, prodding, big fighter on the feet who does have decent volume, but he's not really going to blow you away. He's a classic heavyweight fighter, and I do think this matchup here, it's going to be Gaziev on the front foot, Gaziev landing more shots, being the aggressor, and when it comes down to wrestling success, I do not think Mays has the technicality or strength to really bully a big, bulky boy like Gaziev in this spot. So, especially with cardio not being as much in question, with this being only a 3-rounder compared to Gaziev's last one, I do favor him to get it done, being on the front foot, looking to pressure Mays, hopefully find that chin that has been hit from Dontel Mays before, and winning the spot here. The pick is Shamil Gaziev. DraftKings wise, though, it's an ugly one. I don't really want much Dontel Mays on DraftKings. He scores 69 and 90 in his last 2 spots here. And you know what? Shamil Gaziev can absorb a lot of damage in that matchup. Gaziev himself, though, do I see him getting a finish? Potentially. And at 9.1K, he does have some upside, but I don't really know if I want to choose him over a Fernandes or a Nurmagomedov or a Magomedov. Yes, those are 2 different fighters, by the way. But Gaziev's more of a secondary play up top for me. I prefer some other options. I think there are guys with clear paths to victories above of him. And Gaziev relies more of a guy who needs that knockout to live off his equity here. He's not someone who I see shooting too many takedowns, so without a finish, I don't think he reaches the optimal lineup. So if you think he finishes Mays, play him at 9.1K, but aside from that, I'm kind of tentative to do so. Pick is Gaziev, though. Then we have the 12-4 Muhammad Yayha versus the 8-2 Kaue Fernandes. Another big favorite there in Fernandes, a guy who is 0-1 in the UFC, lost his debut to Mark Diakase in that spot where he was, you know what, D1 Diakase there, but a guy who does have some decent promise. That fight was a split decision, and Kaue Fernandes is coming from a good camp from Nova União, is a guy who has had some devastating knockout wins in the regional scene and has shown some decent striking prowess. He also has a solid submission game and decent offensive wrestling, but he can be stuck on bottom, which we have seen. Is one of those more like gritty Brazilian fighters, right? He's not going to overwhelm you with technicality either way, but he can compete in all facets of MMA, and I do think on the feet, he's a very solid striker. He's facing Muhammad Yayha, and Muhammad Yayha is the guy who fought Trevor Peek and did lose that matchup. He's the guy who lost a decision to Trevor Peek, which is never a good look, especially when you're the only one to do that, but is a guy who I think just has his flaws. Yes, he has a lot of power, but he's super hittable, does not have the most technicality. I think his hand speed is also pretty questionable as well. And also, although he does go for his takedowns of his own right, is a better hammer than he is a nail, and when he is put on bottom position, he does struggle. He did fight a pretty solid pace last time, I'll have to give him that, and did show decent durability, but I think in this matchup here, Kaue Fernandes is going to be the sharper striker, who not only is better technically, but he's going to be quicker to punch. And I do think in this matchup here, because of that, he's going to have opportunities to land on Muhammad Yayha here, whether it be with that flashy body kick we've seen, whether it be the head kick we've seen as well, or different levels of strike that Kaue presents here. I think he's a very dangerous fighter when it comes to it, a guy who does have a path to victory. I don't think Yayha has that same wrestling as Diakase, and even this matchup, Fernandes was able to stay with it and fight to a split there. So give me Kaue Fernandes in this matchup, pretty wide price tag, so I don't necessarily know if I'm going to get to him here, but a guy who I do think wins the striking, has even a wrestling upside of his own right, but also has the ability to go out there, battles, and be a guy who I think gets his hand raised more times than not. He is my pick to win this matchup. 9.3K, I guess he does have the opportunity to knock out Yayha's lights. I think he is pretty tough, though, so I don't really necessarily think that that's going to come too easily. And because of that, he just becomes a really boom or bust option at 9.3K. Because without that knockout win, he's not going to score that well. And we have some really solid wrestlers on the slate here with Umar Nurmagomedov and Chiesa and even Dumas having ground and path to victory. That at 9.3K, without that knockout, I do not think he goes out there and they optimal lineup. He's very close to that Gaziev style. Now, Yayha has shown decent durability, but he has been knocked out before. He has been choked as well. He's been finished in 3 of his 4 losses, so I do think there is a path for Kaue Fernandes. He is a riskier option up top without much grappling equity and with limited finish upside, but shall he get that finish, I do think is one of the highest ceilings on the slate. Riskier option, more of a tournament play, but I do think he gets it done more times than not. I do like him at 9.3K. He is my pick to win. And then we have the undefeated 13-0 Azamat Murzakanov versus the 15-4-1 Alonzo Menifield. I think this is a fun fight. Headline in the prelims, a good light heavyweight matchup. I think this one could be fun. I mean, I saw Alonzo Menifield last in St. Louis, a guy who exhibited a really weird game plan, blitzing Carlos Ulberg, being finished in the first round, but a guy who before that was on a decent run. He is still someone who can go out there, is very visually threatening, very, very big, bulky dude with a ton of power in his hands, and you know what has shown the ability to win decisions more on times than not. He has shown the ability to wrestle a bit too. He seems to be a guy who has all the physical traits, but sometimes struggles to put it all together. You know, one day he's losing decisions to William Knight. and the next time he's going out there and submitting Jimmy Crute or outstriking Dustin Jacoby. I mean, the guy has a solid skill set, but just struggles mentally sometimes, I think, and that makes him someone who's tough to trust and why he's another underdog. I think when it comes down to it, in this matchup here, facing a guy like Murzakanov, he's going to have paths. I mean, Murzakanov has been losing rounds before. He looked really bad in his debut there against Achukwi until finding that flying knee knockout. He was able to go out there and also outstrike Jacoby and potentially wrestle Clark as well, but as a guy who was more limited on knockdown outside, he is a decent wrestler, but someone who likes to cage press instead, and he is someone who, although has a ton of options to outstrike his opponents, has solid volume on the feet as well, is also hittable, can lose minutes because of that, and is not someone who deserves to be as hyped up as he is. I think in this matchup here, there's 100% a world where Menifield does not think properly, does not have the best game plan, and maybe looks like an idiot again. But I do think Menifield has the physicality to work along the cage with Murzakanov, to threaten takedowns of his own right, put him on his back, which we haven't really seen happen to Murzakanov before, but also strike with him, land those powerful shots, utilize that in and out movement, and I don't think he should be as wide of an underdog as we do see him here. So with both these guys having the amount of power they do, I would not be surprised with the finish, but I also think these guys are pretty durable. Maybe Menifield doesn't show that all the time, but he can go out there, he can strike, and I do think in doing so, he has minute-winning capabilities here. So I actually picked Menifield, a really interesting spot here. I was surprised to do so myself, but Murzakanov I still think has flaws in his game, is still a guy who is super hittable, has those weird loopy shots, and I do think Menifield, with the right game plan, can have success here. So give me the dog here, Menifield. DraftKings-wise, Murzakanov, I guess he does have KO upside. We have seen Menifield knocked out early a few times before, but hasn't always historically been the best DraftKings scorer. I mean, Menifield hasn't either, and I do think that although he's an underdog picking a win, I'm not necessarily forcing him into all my lineups. But simply put, it's a matchup that you can play. I mean, in theory, Murzakanov does have a path to knocking at Menifield early and scoring very well 8.7K. Menifield also has a path to go out there and win this fight as a whole, which is maybe all you need on a card like this that's a bit trickier, but they don't necessarily have that same type of ceilings as a Dumas, who we mentioned already, or a Bedoya with clear finish upside. They're people who I think go out there and in a win probably score 95, 100 points, and they don't necessarily blow you out of the water. Could that make the optimal lineup? Of course. I'm picking Menifield. I hope he does make the optimal lineup because I'm picking him to do so. But a weird fight to break down on DraftKings. Then on to this 6-fight main card, we have the 20-3 Joel Alvarez, 16-4 Elvis Brener. This is a fun one. These are two guys who I think can be broken down pretty easily. Joel Alvarez is a phenomenal hammer. Not the best now. He is very explosive, very good offensively, has a great submission game, extremely dangerous with power on the feet as well, but if he doesn't get that finish, if he's forced to be put in these precarious situations, if he's forced to work, he struggles a bit. He can turn into a fighter who loses minutes, who gives up in these spots here and can be submitted, and Elvis Brenner is kind of the opposite. Brenner is not that skilled technically, being nice, all right? He's a fighter who can be taken down, he's a fighter who can be hit, but there's almost nobody tougher than him. He will fight through adversity. He will push forward. He doesn't care how bloody he is, how badly he's beaten up. He'll push forward, and he'll look to finish you, and he'll dig deep, and he'll be a dog. And I think that makes it for a very interesting matchup. Because I do think the more skilled fighter here is Joel Alvarez. I think he's the better submission artist. I think he's the better striker with more power on the feet. But the guy who I think is going to be going forward and pushing the pace and looking to break you in that third round is Elvis Brener. And the guy more likely to give up is going to be a guy Joel Alvarez. So as long as they're fresh, I favor Alvarez, but I don't see him getting a finish too often, which leaves me very interested in Elvis Brener. Because if Alvarez has not shown to me that he can compete for a hard 15 minutes, Brenner's going to really put that to the test. And although I have faded Brener before because his lack of just skill in that first round, he has an opponent in front of him who is breakable, who is not the best nail, and I do think Brener in those late rounds can be a hammer. So I'm picking Elvis Brener. I think he's a very dangerous play to pick this week because, again, not the most technical fighter, but he will dig deep. I do like to trust him in those later rounds, and I do think it's a very, very fun fight. DraftKings-wise, 7.9K, I like Brener. He's a guy who can land takedowns and who will definitely go out there and dig deep against a guy in Alvarez who can be finished. So with that amount of volume, with that amount of upside, and we've seen him get late finishes and score over 100 points, I do like him at 7.9K. He can compete on the mat. We have seen Alvarez stuck in bottom position as well. I think there are many paths of Brener for scoring well, and I love this fight's activity. I love this fight's ability to finish, and I do think Brenner's able to get it done, so 7.9K, I love him. Whereas Alvarez has so much finishing upside. In his 5 wins in the UFC, all of them have come in the first 2 rounds, and he has scored very, very well. Scored above 92 points in every single one of those wins, and I do think at 8.3K, a finish win is definitely his path to victory here. It's going to be easier said than done because Brener is so durable, but I just think if he's winning, it's coming because of an early finish, whether it be on the feet, whether it be on the mat, because as the fight goes on, it's only going to favor Brener. So I think both these sides are viable on DraftKings. I'm picking Brener. I'll be probably playing more of him due to his price tag, and he's my pick to win. Should be a fun fight. Next up, 13-5, Mackenzie Dern versus the 12-4, Lupita Godinez. I love me some Lupi. You know, Canadian fighter, someone who I love to cheer for, who has made some questionable decisions before, but a girl who I like to cheer for. She's made me a lot of money. I love her wrestling physicality. I love the fact she's improving her hands over there with Grosso. She seems to be a very, very solid fighter, and I do love her physicality. She's getting a very solid test here, Mackenzie Dern, someone who has been up and down, let's put it that way. Had that phenomenal performance against Hill, and then struggled a bit against Lemos. A girl who is one of the best jiu-jitsu practitioners we've seen, is a phenomenal ground game, can snatch any limbs when she's on bottom position, or on top for that matter. But although she's extremely durable in the feet, can be hit, has struggled with her takedown, her physicality. I think when it comes down to it, is a spot where she kind of needs that fight to hit the mat for her to have success. And in this spot here, I kind of think that's easier said than done. Lupita Godinez, in my eyes, is the much better striker, especially working those hands with the Grosso team. I do think she is someone who is just ever improving on the feet and has the boxing credentials to go out there and piece up Dern to an easy decision, the same way she did Ducote. But she's going to be facing a lot of shots. I do think it could only take one slip for Mackenzie Dern to go out there and cause problems. What I do like from Godinez, though, is not only does she have a good fundamental base of what she's doing on the mat, but she has good physicality. I mean, Vera was able to threaten her here, but Dern doesn't have the same takedown upside, and I do think Godinez is able to win those takedown exchanges, have the hips to stay upright, and win those wrestling transitions. I do like Lupita Godinez this matchup. I do think she outstrikes Dern to a decision win. Has the jiu-jitsu and wrestling to keep this upright. I think it should be a very fun fight. DraftKings-wise, I typically love Lupita Godinez because when she goes out there and has a wrestling path to victory, she score well. 128 against Reed, 129 against Carnelossi, 127 against Gomez Juarez. When she has that finishing upside and wrestling upside, she goes out there and scores very, very well. But when she is just limited to striking, it hasn't been the best. 88 against Ducote, 66 against Calvillo, 69 against Ricci. She needs takedowns to score well on DraftKings, and I don't think she wants to do it against Dern here. So although I'm picking Godinez to win, I typically love her on DraftKings. Not in this spot, I'll actually be staying away from her. And actually, instead, I'd kind of rather Dern, because if Dern wins, it's going to be wrestling-oriented and submission-oriented. She needs a submission to win. And in her submission win, she scored 110 against Nunes, 102 against Marcos, 92 against Cyphers. She is someone who has historically scored very, very well when she gets those finishes, and I do think she's going to need a finish to win the spot here. So picking Godinez, I do think she wins the fight at a decent clip here, but shall Dern win? It's going to score very well due to submission upside. I prefer Dern on DraftKings, but the pick is Lupita Godinez. Next up, 25-10, Tony Ferguson, 16-7, Michael Chiesa. Huge wide line here, and I get it. It's Tony Ferguson. He's not the Tony Ferguson who was throwing sand and looking great. He's a guy who's lost 7 in a row, a guy who has looked awful in these matchups, and it's just not the same guy, and it's one of the guys who want to see retire. I love Tony. I remember him for his peak, and he's getting another tough matchup. I mean, Michael Chiesa, although he's lost a few fights in his own right, is a guy who does have some solid wrestling, is a guy who's a big boy and can typically go out there and hold people down. He is a true welterweight, whereas I guess he's also a lightweight, but he has been fighting at this larger weight class for a while. Now here's the weird dynamic of this fight. Chiesa should win. He has clear wrestling upside. We saw Dariush hold him down on the mat. We saw Oliveira hold him down on the mat. We saw Bobby Green hold him down the mat for a long period of time and even choke him out in that third round there. But Paddy Pimblett go out there and hold him down as well. People are able to hold down Ferguson and keep him there, and that's what Chiesa does. Chiesa is a primary wrestler. That is what he wants to go out there and do. Hold down Neil Magny, hold down RDA, hold down Sanchez. That's what he does best, but he can be caught in these submissions. And I do think that the one path to victory Tony Ferguson does have is landing one of those signature dark choices. I don't think it happens too often, but maybe more than this line entails. And I do think maybe there is some fun in cheering for Tony Ferguson this week. But at the end of the day, I have to pick Chiesa. He does have a clear path to victory, being the more youthful fighter here. Isn't saying much, but a guy who I do think should win. Am I playing him at his price tag? Definitely not. I think Ferguson could lock something up, but it is a spot where you do have to pick Chiesa, in my opinion. 9.5K, he does have clear wrestling upside. He's able to go out there and score 101 against Magny. That was 5 round. I do think he has some potential to go out there and score well and hold down Ferguson, who has been pretty easy to take down. So 9.5K, a solid play, pretty solid floor. Ferguson, clear punt play, 6.7K. If he wins, it's probably coming by submission. It's probably going to make the crowd go crazy. And in those submission wins, he scored 110 against Cerrone, 115 against Pettis. Solid upside there. I think it's going to take a miracle at this point of his career for Ferguson, but I will sprinkle some of him in due to his high scoring upside. It should be a very fun fight. Well, it should be a fight that hopefully we're not left in too many shambles. Hopefully Ferguson's able to turn back the clock and have a success here. I am cheering for him, but it is an interesting spot to say the least. They have the 23-9-1 Marlon Vera versus the 23-3-1 Davison Figueiredo. This is a fight I'm looking forward to. It's a high-level matchup between two strikers. I do guess Figueiredo could have some wrestling upside, but two guys who want to go out there and put on a show. Historically, extremely durable, especially Vera. That beating he took from Sean O'Malley is certainly something, let's put it that way. But both extremely durable, both have striking upside. And in a 3-round fight like this, I think it's going to be very close. Let's put some things out there, though. Vera loses that first round a lot of the time, and he is someone who is constantly giving him that first round, constantly losing because of that. And I do think in this matchup here, it is going to be important. He does build as the fight goes on, and I do think more times than not, Figueiredo wins that first round because Vera starts slow. If Vera wins that third round because he builds the fight goes on, we know that these guys are durable enough not to get finished. who wins that second round? And although Figueiredo's a 125, and although he's someone who is a bit smaller, I kind of like him in this matchup. I like his volume, I like his pressure, I like his ability to start fast. The fact that he does throw with fight any intention all times. He can win optics that way too. Vera is a very solid minute winner, but when you lose that first round and when Figueiredo is going to be constantly pressing you, I do think he only has to win 2 rounds in this matchup in a fight that does end up playing out the way it does. You throw in the takedown upside that Figueiredo has, and I do think that he is a very solid play. I think it's going to be a very close fight, and I do think the line deserves to be as close as it is here, but I'm going to pick Figueiredo to go out there and bank the first 2 rounds and coast his way to a decision. Grappling upside, volume upside, and really starting fast is what I really like in this matchup. Give me Davison Figueiredo. Now, I still love Vera. Vera's always been a solid play because of the volume he has, and I do think at 7.8K is a solid underdog. Scored 86 against Munoz, 97 against Grant. And I do think Figueiredo is able to go out there and exchange, but 8.4K Figueiredo is also someone who I do like. Scored 88 against Garbrandt in that matchup. Maybe not the best, but with volume upside, potential takedown upside as well. He has historically been a guy who can go out there and score very, very well. I do like his upside, and as someone I'm picking to win at 8.4K, I think it's a solid play if you are looking to target this mid-range this week. Give me Davison Figueiredo in what should be a very, very fun fight. Co-main event time, 13-0 Magomedov versus the 19-8 Mikhail Oleksiejczuk. Saving the co-main slot, so we're happy to have him here. But a fight between 2 guys in maybe a bit different directions, right? You have a guy in Magomedov, undefeated, huge hype train here in the UFC. I mean, he looks scary with that beard and that one eye, right? He's a cool fighter. Whereas Oleksiejczuk, 1-3 in his last 4, had his arm snapped by Kevin Hall literally 2 months ago, and has not looked the best. He hasn't finished a lot of these losses, and yes, he does have a fun style inside the cage, but a guy who doesn't really necessarily merit this co-main event slot at this point of his career. It does seem a matchup that should be very fun. Both these guys are pure strikers, right? Magomedov wants to go out there, utilize his crazy kicks, and just spam kicks, whereas Mikhail Oleksiejczuk wants to go forward, push you against the cage, utilize incredible cardio, incredible boxing, and solid power to go out there and just look to dismantle you. In doing so, though, he is soft to the body. He can be taken down very, very easily and submitted on the mat. Although that's not Cher's path to victory, typically, I do think Cher has the advantage here. At the end of the day, I do think I have to pick Magomedov. Not only is the A side in this matchup, but also someone who I just think has more confidence going into it. I mean, we just saw Mikhail Oleksiejczuk put a picture on Instagram, comment back to someone, and literally said in his own words, he thinks he's going to lose this fight and go to KSW. He does think he's going to lose this fight. His confidence is not there. He's put up against a killer here in Magomedov. And although Mikhail Oleksiejczuk has this phenomenal ability to pressure forward with boxing exchanges, doesn't throw any kicks, and that's all Cher does. Because of that, I do think Cher controls the distance. I do think he lands the better shots, whether it be to the body, whether it be to the head. I do think he has a ton of upside, let alone potential wrestling upside. Shall he go there? Because I just think Mikhail Oleksiejczuk is just so poor on the ground. Cher at least is competing in tournaments. I just think Cher has more paths getting it done, and I do think he has more going for him continuing this hype train to success here. DraftKings-wise, because of how, let's say, the confidence is lacking for Mikhail, because he can be taken down, because he can be hit to the body and hurt that way too, 9K, I don't mind Cher Magomedov. A solid play, scored over 93 points in both his wins so far. 9K, I don't mind him in this co-main event slot. I do think he's primed for success against someone who has been finished in all these losses. Oleksiejczuk is another punt play, very similar to a Dontel Mays or Tiuliulin that we mentioned already. He probably needs a very pressure or perfect performance to go out there and win, and I think in doing so, he would have to pressure and look to break him. Scored 117 against Murzakanov, 105 against Brundage, 124 against Alvi. These are all great performances, scoring very well. I just don't think it happens too often, without much wrestling upside, without much ability to close the distance. I do think it's Magomedov's fight to lose, and I am picking Magomedov to win this fight, so not getting to Oleksiejczuk that often. Picking Cher Bullet, I do think he gets it done. He's my pick to win. And then main event time, 17-0 Umar Nurmagomedov, 17-4 Corey Sandhagen. I think this is a super fun fight. I was almost there to watch it live in Nashville before it got postponed. I love it here. I think it's a great one. Corey Sandhagen is such a tricky guy to go out there and analyze because he's got so much volume. He's got great cardio, solid transition on the mat as well. He's just a very well-rounded prospect, but he's facing this killer here in Umar Nurmagomedov, who is undefeated, has incredible wrestling, great transitions himself, and has shown some really good kickboxing on the feet as well. I am picking Umar to win this fight. Let's put it out right. He's my pick to win. But I don't think it's going to be that easy, and I do think Corey Sandhagen will go out there and put out a fight. Now, we have seen Sandhagen taken down and submitted in that very first round by Aljo, and I do think Umar is a very dangerous threat, but I don't think it happens too often. I think more times than not, Corey Sandhagen just stays safe. He's working on that wrestling. I think he is the better volume striker of the two on the feet, and I do think he can cause problems. At the end of the day, I do think Umar is a very good back taker. I think he's able to steal rounds with takedowns and back control. I do think on the feet, he can definitely go out there and hold his own. Do I think that this line should be minus 700? No, I think it should be around minus 200, minus 250 for Umar, where it is right now, because he does have such a ability to steal rounds with that wrestling and compete on the feet his own right. I do think he is the guy who also has more finish potential on the mat with his submission game, making this for a very interesting matchup. I like Corey Sandhagen. I think he's a guy who has a ton of volume and should be at the top of the division for a long time, but Umar, I just think, is on a different level right now. With his very well-rounded game, great takedowns, great volume, is a fighter who I do like to back here, is my pick to win. 9.2K on DraftKings, has scored phenomenally, averages 110 points, has scored over 105 in every single matchup he's had, and now he has, you know what, 5 rounds to work. My favorite play on the entire slate, 9.2K. Sandhagen's also a live underdog because he does have so much volume, because I do think this fight does get extended, and at 7K, solid, maybe stacking option this week, but I do like Magomedov. But I do like Umar as one of my favorite plays, 9.2K, love him up top. That's going to do it for me here on the Plays and Fades YouTube channel, and quickly running through my quick picks. Taking Umar Nurmagomedov, Magomedov, Davison Figueiredo, Mikael Chiesa, Godinez, Elvis Brener, Alonso Menifield, Fernandes, Shamil Gaziev, Kutateladze, Victoria Dudakova, Jai Herbert, and Cedric Dumas. DraftKings wise, I love Umar Nurmagomedov up top. I think that Magomedov and Fernandes are solid fighters up there with their striking, and I do love that Chiesa versus Ferguson fight. Either you're getting the wrestling upside of Chiesa or you're getting that punt play at such a cheap salary for someone like Ferguson who does, in theory, have a submission path to victory. In the mid-range, I don't mind Dumas. I love that Figueiredo versus Vera fight. I love that Alvarez versus Brener fight as well. Underdog-wise, like I said, I love Brener. I love Vera. I think Bedoya has finish upside. I think Vucenic in a win would score very, very well as someone like Ferguson or Tiuliulin, whose path to victories require very good DraftKings score. No more Rainmakers, so no Rainmakers picks, but betting-wise, I have nothing locked in yet. Be sure to check me out on Twitter at GamblesReport to see what I'm posting, and check out at CoolBet using code QUARTER there for 100% deposit match up to $200. That's going to do it for me here on the Plays Video YouTube channel. Hit the like button down below, subscribe to the channel. Hopefully, I was able to give you guys enough insight into what is a really fun 13-fight card from Abu Dhabi. I wish everybody all the best of luck in all your DraftKings and betting endeavors, guys, and let's make some money.